Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie, and I believe that all readers should read children's literature, especially adults. So that's what we do on the KidLit Love podcast. We celebrate all things children's literature, picture books, early readers, middle grade, and young adult novels too. Whether you're an adult reading to your inner child or connecting the young readers in your lives with fantastic books, you've come to the right place. Each week, we'll talk to a different children's literature author and discuss their books, their hopes and dreams for readers, their writing process, and much, much more. So, grab a notebook to build your TBR, and let's get to today's episode of KidLit Love. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the KidLit Love podcast. I'm Stephanie Affinito, your KidLit loving host, inviting you back to another episode of the show. But this time is a little bit different because this is a bonus episode for the week. And it's a bonus episode because I am so excited to welcome Pernille Ripp to the show to talk all about her powerful global movement, the Global Read Aloud. The GRA is a yearly project that connects classrooms around the world together with a book over the course of a 6-week period. During that time, classrooms connect together to read, to share, to celebrate literature, and make as many connections and bookish relationships as they can. I have loved and I have participated in this project for many years, and I am thrilled to welcome Pernille and talk all about it, including how this round in 2024 is going. So let's get right to the conversation. Pernille, welcome to KidLit Love. I am just so glad you're here today.
I'm so glad to be here. It's such an honor to be amongst fellow KidLit lovers, and I know you do so much work out in the world. So thanks for making space for me today.
Oh, I am honored. If I am honest, one of the reasons that I let myself really dive in deeply to the children's literature world and even consider bringing a dream like this podcast to life was started years ago with your book, Passionate Readers. It truly was. That book was a game changer for me. At the time, I was a literacy coach, and I was a literacy coach of the coaches. And I had this wonderful group pre-COVID with about 30 something literacy coaches that got together every month. And we did a book study on passionate readers. And from that moment on, like everything changed. Our relationships changed, our interactions with books changed, our mission as coaches really changed. And so I'm just honored you're here. And I know, like Shelly, if you're listening, Krista, if you're listening, I am actually talking to Pernille Ripp in person.
Yeah, Pernille
Thank
Ripp
you.
is in tears. It's really wild to hear because Passionate Readers was just a book. It was a story. It was a story of going, this isn't working, and how do we make it better? And you never expect your books to reach anyone. I mean, there's so many education books out there. There's so many amazing books being published. And so to hear that you took that and it brought you together with the community that you were in, it's incredible. It's really emotional for me to hear. I think also because I now sit in Denmark. After 24 years in the U.S. and Passionate Readers was written in the U.S. and I sit in Denmark, so far removed from my community of literacy people, and you're included in that. And so to hear that I left this trail behind me is really, really powerful. Because here in Denmark, I'm no one, and not that I was anything in the U.S., but I don't go to a conference and people go, "Oh, I know about the Global Read Aloud." And so thank you for that. That's something I'm going to carry in my heart today and for a long time. I really appreciate that.
Oh, well, I am glad to be able to pay it forward. Sure. I could talk about it for quite a long time. So let's start with introductions. You've mentioned a little bit. You were in the US, you are in Denmark
Yeah.
now. I've already mentioned
Yeah.
Global Read Aloud, but tell us a little bit more about you and where GRA started.
Yeah, I was 18 when I got the chance to move to America and jumped on a chance and didn't know how long I was going to go with my family. But of course, as the story goes, you meet a boy, and that boy, thank God, introduced me to a much better boy who became my husband. And so all of a sudden, I sat in this American life, going, "This is my future." And you kind of have that moment. I spoke with my husband and said, "You're going to bartend the rest of your life." And I was like, "Well, no, I guess not." And it led me into teaching. And I loved being in school for teaching because I had all these incredible dreams of the kind of classroom experience I was going to create for kids. But then reality hits when you're given your first job and you realize all of these unspoken traditions that you carry on and all of these things that you're expected to uphold in this traditional school system. And it was like I forgot who I was. So fast forward 2 years into my teaching career, and I'm hating the way I'm teaching reading. This is also where kind of passionate readers start, kind of passionate learners. And knew I needed a change. And so I decided that I was going to quit teaching because that was going to be the easiest thing. I was an elementary teacher in Middleton, Wisconsin, and while I loved it, I was like, I'm crushing the dreams of small children. This is not what I set out to do. And I went home to my husband and I was like, "Well, I have news. It was the last day of school." And he's like, "Yeah, summer vacation, so great." And I was like, "Well, no, I'm done with teaching." And he's like, "Oh, it's so good." I was like, "Well, no, I'm done." And he just looked at me and he's very pragmatic. And he's like, "What about your student loans?" I'm like, "Oh, yes." But he said something that really just made it so clear for me where my path needed to go. And that was, you can't change the kids, but you can change the way you teach. And that summer, I had this space in my life of going, "Okay, so how do I do that? Like, how do you change the way you teach when you have this tradition wrapped around you, both in a chokehold, but also in a warm embrace when you're lost?" And one night we were driving in the car, and I'm sure I was talking his ear off about, all the things I was going to change. I threw out grading, and I threw out homework, and I threw out behavior charts, and all these things. And we were listening to NPR, and they were talking about Neil Gaiman and the One Book, One World Twitter project that was happening. And it was the global book club of reading American gods, and you just joined in on it. I had just entered Twitter at the time. Like I was pretty new on Twitter. It was back before Twitter was not this toxic hellhole that it kind of is now. But I was like, somebody should do that with kids. And he was like, "Why don't you?" And I was just dumb enough and brave enough and optimistic enough. And I was like, "That's not fun." And so later that night, I went on my computer on my little blog and I was like, "How about a global read aloud? We will read the same book at the same time and we'll share it." And I had not thought it through. And right away, people were like, "Sounds great. How? Where do we sign up?" And so it just became this ball rolling, truly building project as we flew, because it was like, "Oh, we need a sign up spot. Oh, we need somewhere to share information. Oh, what are we going to read? And when are we going to read it? And who's this appealing to?" And I'm so glad. And so that first year, we started in September, later in September, and we read The Little Prince with my fourth graders, and about 200 kids joined in. And I was floored. I was like, "This is so wild. There's educators in Canada reading." And we were using a wiki page because that was the thing I had just learned about, which was truly horrendous for sharing. But the kids were so blown away by these small connections that they were having with other classrooms. Of course, with The Little Prince, we drew the snake eating the elephant, right? And they couldn't believe that other kids in other places were drawing the same things. Yeah. But also, they couldn't believe how similar they were. And I remember it was a 4-week project, and it took a lot of management and all of these things and figuring out. And I was so glad when it was done. It had been great. I was so relieved. And then one woman wrote to me, and she was like, "When are we going to do it again?" I was like, "What do you mean? I'm in the middle of throwing everything out in my classroom and completely creating a new environment, and now you want to do this again?" But it sat with me, and I was like, "You know what? What if we make it a yearly thing? So it does become its own thing." And that's how it grew. And it grew by word of mouth. And the next year we added in a younger book, or a picture book came on pretty quickly. And then the following year, it was like, well, maybe if we expand a little bit more. And it ended up being this, that it is now, where it's a YA and kind of a middle school option, and then a middle grade option, and then a younger reader, and then a picture book. And every year I was blown away that more and more people came, and more people took this project and said, here's what I'm going to do with it. And that was so important to me, because I couldn't manage this project
Right.
needing to be in people's classrooms. And I didn't want it to be a project that was only accessible if you had access to these things. And so it was so important to me from the beginning that the only thing you needed to be a part of the Global Read Aloud was the book.
Yeah.
There should be, there's no cost. It's free. I don't make any money from it. You don't have to use technology, but you can also use like snail mail, or, carrier pigeon, or whatever you want. But I had no dream of it truly becoming global, because if I had dreamed of that, I would have never dared.
Right.
And so for many years, I had people sign up, and I would send, I would send all the welcome emails. Like, I couldn't afford like some sort of, automated service. And finally, when we reached 1 million children signed up, I was like, I can't keep up the welcome emails. And so now, 15 years later, or this was the 15th iteration of the project, it's wild to see that it lives in its own space. I mean, a lot of people, even in the Facebook group, don't know that I created it. And it's so funny. Like,
Oh,
they'll ask a question, right? And I'll answer, and they'll be like, well, I'm not sure about that. And I'm like, no, that's really like, that's the answer. But there's so many unintended things that have come out of the Global Read Aloud. And I think that was my career anyway. I stayed in America for 24 beautiful years. And then we had an opportunity to move back to my home country, brought my American husband with me and my American children. But I think about how I get to be a part of so many classrooms around the world, but more importantly, how we get to be a part of each other. And I think about how in the beginning, of course, I thought about the book choices, but I didn't realize the impact that it had on the authors' lives. And I certainly didn't always realize the impact that it also had on their careers, or even like how they would speak to kids. Like, I was very like, oh, it just needs to be a good read aloud experience. And now when I choose the books, it's so much different. And so, I'm just this kid from a small town in Denmark who took a drive one night and took a chance. And it was in this glory days of, let's just try it and see what happens. And other people also looking to be more connected and looking at technology as a way to connect us, but also not knowing how to do that in a meaningful way and how to do it in a safe way with kids. And so the fact that you and I could be strangers, if we see each other reading the same book, we already feel more connected. I knew that there was something there that could bring us together in a whole different way.
yeah.
So now I'm in Denmark, and I'm a second grade teacher, which is wild. But I never thought I'd be a young kid teacher, but I love it. And I realized I took a break from teaching for a year, that I I'm meant to be a teacher, and I'm so glad I'm back with kids. And I see the power of read aloud every single day in my classroom, and I see the power of connection and of using the tools that we have at our disposal to help kids realize that we are so much more similar than we think we are,
Yeah.
and to not believe all of those who want to divide us. So, yeah.
That's the power of the book, right? That's the power of the shared connection with a book. In my career, I spent so many years teaching kids, teaching teachers how to teach kids how to read, right? It was about alphabetics and fluency and comprehension and engagement and all the things. And I couldn't figure out how to put into words for the teachers that I would work with at the beginning of the career that I'm teaching you all of these skills so that you can then pass these skills along to kids. But we're doing that so that they can see the power that books hold, right? There is an end game in that. And I think for a lot of my students, that really wasn't clear because they didn't have the experience yet. They were brand new in their career. But when I would introduce them to the Global Read Aloud, and I would show them the books, and we would hear the authors, and we would poke our heads in the Facebook groups. And my favorite, which is I could just get lost in those Google Sheets forever with all of those teachers reaching out. It was in those moments where I feel like so many of my teachers to be realized oh, this is the bigger thing that she's talking about. Yes, I'm teaching them how
Right.
to read, but this book, once it's unlocked, it connects us. It gives us empathy.
Yeah.
It gives us a new perspective. And just the connections that I see classrooms make, the connections that
Uh-huh.
I've made, teachers that I wouldn't have known if it wasn't for
Uh-huh.
poking my head into those groups. I feel like while the Global Read Aloud may be once a year and it may be a 6 week block of time, those connections start there. And then the beautiful
Yeah.
thing is they just keep going and growing and it just
Yeah.
becomes bigger and bigger, all starting with that one book.
Yeah. People make it their own. And I think, and I always wanted to make wherever we were gathering, and it happens to be on Facebook now, because it's super accessible as far as a group perspective, but that it wasn't okay, the project is over for the year, so this group is going to be silent.
Right.
And so I always tell people, use your connection, use each other for ideas, or if you want to do another project, or if you're looking for someone to connect with or whatever. But here is your group of people who are looking for bigger global experiences. Here are your group of people who will take chances with you. And also here are veteran teachers that will welcome new teachers and say, we have paved a path and we can't wait for you to change the path, but also here's tools for you to use. And I think that that's the beauty of it, that yes, it's a 6 week project, but the community never sleeps. The community is there and open to anyone who wants to be a part of it. And also, like, some people can't do the 6 weeks, right? There's fall breaks and there's all sorts of curricular schedules. And so some people are like in January going, okay, I'm going to start the project now rather than in October. And I think that that's beautiful too, because absolutely, please do use this as a portal to each other. Because I know that there's a lot of teachers who sit in situations where they feel really alone, or where they maybe have ideas of the type of classroom experience they want to create. And so a project like the Global Read Aloud can make you feel like you're not sitting by yourself on an island. You're connected to all these other
Yeah.
people that also have ideas of what a read aloud experience can be, or what kind of classroom community you want to create, or what kind of critical thinking situations you want to put your students in front of. And so it's been just amazing to see what it became and what it becomes, and it continues to change and evolve. And so a lot of my job now behind the scenes is just getting out of the way and then kind of like honing in if it gets a little too wild in one direction, but
Yeah.
really to continue to let this thing just grow and to be this organic project that you can enter into in so many different ways, but hopefully come out of it feeling like it mattered and that you have changed as a practitioner and that your students have an experience that they will also carry with them.
Yeah. Which reminds me of from reading Passionate Readers, that's a lot of your philosophy of working with little people too, or younger people, which is give them books and get out of the way and see what
Yeah,
happens.
so much so. Give them the tools, give them the books, and if they're saying I hate the books, then ask why. Like
Yeah.
what are the emotions that we carry with us? And I think that's what Read Aloud does for us too, right? It legitimizes these incredibly human feelings that we carry around, and both in good and bad. And I think for a kid to see themselves in a book, it's so powerful. We know that, obviously. We all quote Dr. Rudin's Basic, but when we get to pull a book in front of kids and say, I connect with this book too, and this is what I take out of it, we're also sharing each other's humanity. And then when you all of a sudden invite what starts at strangers in, it just becomes so powerful. And so for kids to be able to see themselves as readers and all of that, I think it's just such a beautiful thing, because that's what it comes down to. You can't create readers without talking about reading identity and reading culture. All of this fits in together.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about the 2024 round, year 15, which is amazing. So
It's
huge
wild.
congratulations with that. How did you go about choosing the books for this year? Because I've read pretty much every blog post you've ever produced and looked at all of those things, and I eagerly look forward to that release day when I see those books. And I'm just curious of how you managed to whittle it down for each of those categories every year.
It's so hard and the pressure is so big, and I try not to let it get to me. It was a lot easier in the US because I simply had access to books in a way that I don't here in Denmark. Obviously, publishers are like, we love you, but we don't want to send you books in Denmark. So I'm like, okay, how can I then see what's out there? So to be a global read aloud book, the nitty gritty, the kind of the boring part that a lot of people don't realize is that I tend to shy away from books that already have a focus on them because people are going to discover those books on their own. I look at the different backgrounds that the authors bring into the project to make sure that it's not homogenous experience and truly representative. I try to look for books that have a global perspective, even though a vast majority of educators who are in the project are somehow connected to North America. It is truly a global project.
I think like in the final kind of nitty gritty detail is just like the publisher has to have a global reach, right? That there's so many fantastic books coming from small publishers, but if I can't get it, if I'm sitting in Sweden or in Thailand or somewhere in Africa, I need to be able to get these books. And so those are kind of like not the boring bits, but like the things behind the scene that maybe people don't realize. And then obviously too, there's a length piece to it, like, and just is it a good read aloud? But bottom line of what makes a good global read aloud book is a gut feeling. And I think that that's what makes it so hard every year because I read a lot of books, obviously on purpose, both because I love books and also just because I'm always searching. I'm always searching. Any book I pick up is like, is this the one? Is this the one that's going to be our book? And oftentimes I'll read the books that get selected and I'll sit with this kind of feeling like, well, this could be the one. This could be the one. And then I finish it. And then if it keeps coming back to me, like every time I think about the mixture of books or the experience, there's just books that continue to rise and come back to me and they'll wake me up and I'll wake up in the morning and I'll be like, I think this is the one. I think this is the one. I think this is the one. And then I'll write it on a post-it. So I almost always, and I actually don't right now, and it's stressing me out, but I almost always have a post-it on my desk that has like titles that are in the running.
Okay.
And then I'll put them together and I have to actually see them and be like, does this mix work? Like whose voices are being represented? Who's getting the focus? And also like, is there a unifying theme? And there doesn't need to be, but is there like what is it that's drawing me towards this grouping of books? And then I sit with it, and then sometimes I change it last minute, but almost always, like, I've known for probably about a month before I
Mhm.
finally hit publish
Yeah.
because I carry them with me. And I have two friends, Jillian Heisey and Kobe Sharp, and I'll often text them and be like, "What do you think of this?" And I know that they know that I'm thinking of the Global Read Aloud.
Yeah.
Um, but and then there's other people too that I'll pull in if I really need to. For a long time, a lot of people and people graciously say like, "We'll help you. We'll make a committee. We'll talk about it." But the thing is, the global read aloud, even if it's a global project, it's my baby,
Yeah.
and ultimately the buck stops with me. And so far, I would say for almost all the books that have been chosen, my gut feeling has been right. There's definitely been books that have been even better than expected, and then some that maybe didn't work the way I hoped. But it's an awesome burden that I love, and right now my brain is already doing kind of the mental gymnastics. Like I've been going down some rabbit holes, especially picture book authors. Oh, do they have to have six, right? They have to have six in order to have a book every six or every week for the 6 weeks. So that one automatically takes some really amazing contenders out. And so like I talked to Min, who is the this year's
Yes.
picture book author. I saw him at NPTE 2 years ago, and I was like, "Hey, do you happen to have any picture books coming out?" And he was like, "Oh yeah, like let me show you." And in my head, I was like, "Boom, that's number six." I was like, "Oh, you don't even know what this conversation just meant in my head." So it's a lot of that. And I do try to reach out to people too and say, like, for example, Lee and Low, the publishers are incredibly generous. And I can reach out to them and say, I'm looking for this. Like, do you have anything that pops to mind? Because inevitably I'm going to miss an incredible book. Like the one and only Ivan, I had not read. And it just kept coming up when I was asked for suggestions. people were like, "You have to read this book." And I was like, "Really? Okay." And I read it in one night and I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is brilliant." And then it was chosen. And then that year it won the Newbery, right? So like we were
Right.
ahead of that. And but there are always books that come back. Or even like this year's middle school choice, Hands by Tori Maldonado. Like that book was almost the like that was like the runner up last year where we did Jared Lerner's book, A Work in Progress. And so when it wasn't chosen, it just like stayed in my head. And I was like, this is also a global read aloud book. This
Yeah.
is also a global read aloud book. And it's been such a beautiful experience seeing that happen this year.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, like when my husband films me and I sometimes share that of like me hitting publish on that blog post, like that's not for show. Like I am freaking out going, what's, because people are swift and
Yeah.
it's so
Yeah.
fun. I think they forget sometimes that it's just me. And
Right.
so when they don't like the choices, they're mean.
Yeah.
And I'm always like, you don't have to do it if it doesn't work
Right.
for you. So, and
Right.
then there's a lot of love too, but it's funny. It's funny.
Yeah. Well, I think that was one of the fun parts for me was seeing what your choices were, getting excited when I knew some of them, but then getting more excited when I didn't, because it was this
Mm,
opportunity for me, whether I thought it was a best choice or not, or there was a book that I wished you pick. I mean, there are so many books, right? And I always
mm,
tell my kiddos, books are patient, right? And
mm,
they wait for you. And it's our job to just be open to them because we can get something out of every book that we read.
mm.
And I've got to say, when I saw this book on your 2024 lineup, I thought she's chosen one of my favorites, Where the Lemon Trees Grow.
I know. That was
So beautiful. I have
cute.
pushed that book into so many people's hands and they have loved it just as dearly as I have. So I would love for you to quickly mention what those choices are that are being read right now. We already mentioned the picture book study.
Yeah. So the picture
Uh,
book story is the incredible Min Lay, who his books are just they're so different and yet they just always feel like coming home.
they do.
And I love the representation and I love how they make me cry. And I love just the different everyday stories with a twist. And so it's just been so much fun to see the work that kids have been creating around these books. And they're books that I loved reading to my own children too. So not just my students, my big seventh grade students. And I have his English books in my Danish classroom too, and I translate them. And then for the early reader, it's actually two books, which is a new thing this year. And it's just because of their length, but it's the Incredible Two Small Tola series. And I love that. And that was actually a book that I read the first book right when it came out, so several years ago. And I was like, this would be an amazing global read aloud choice, but it was too short. And I
Yeah.
was like, shoot, like this, even in primary grades, this would be hard to stretch over
Right.
6 weeks. But it kept coming back to me because of the depiction of just this glorious kid in Nigeria, right? Living her life and going through all of the like the normal little kid stuff that happens, but at the same time inviting us into Nigeria in a really beautiful way and really painting this portrait of love for Nigeria. And so it kept coming back. And finally I was like, oh my gosh, that's right. It's a series now. You kind of read the first and then sometimes you don't come back to that if that's not
Yeah.
where you're sitting with your students. And I was just so excited. And so I was like, we're gonna try it. We're gonna make it two books and hope that people don't get upset. And people have loved it. So I was grateful for that because I will say that the early reader choice is the hardest choice to make because there's the least amount of books to choose from.
Yeah.
Because we tend to go really, really short with early readers, or publishers do. I think a lot of authors would love to write longer early readers. And so I'm always looking for that like 100, pages for that category. And there's just not a lot of books out there that then don't skew too old.
Right.
And so that one is always the one where I'm reaching out. I'm looking at people's lists. I'm looking like what's out there, what's out there, what's out there. Um, then, of course, the middle grade, which is the biggest category, it's the one that that has the most educators in it. This year, it's Lisa Phibbs' incredible book, And Then Boom. Although set in the US and is a very US book, I think it also carries so many connections to just the human experience of what it means to not have the family that you deserve. And how do you survive that? Who then comes in and loves you when no one is around to do that? Who then comes in and feeds you? And obviously, I, like so many others, absolutely fell in love with Lisa's work through Starfish,
Oh,
and
me
was
too.
just right, and Starfish was a book too that even though it had a girl on the cover, so many of my male students were reading as well. Even though in middle school there tends to be this like very weird aversion to girls on covers if you're not identifying as a girl, which I hate and I always actively work against. But that book was a book that the kids passed around. And I was lucky enough to get a preview copy, an arc of, and then boom. And that was one of those books where I read it and I was like, this could be it. This could be it.
Right.
This could be it. And it kept coming in. So when I published it, the book hadn't come out yet. And that I've done that a couple of times for the choices. And every time I'm like, I have to write in the blog post, like, just trust me on this one. And people do. So I'm grateful for that.
Well, you have a good track record. So.
Yeah, I mean, so far so good. But I do try to think of like accessibility and through like, can they get has it been translated into other languages? And is there a paperback version so it's cheaper and whatnot? Obviously, Hands, I already talked about the incredible book by Tori Maldonado, a friend of mine who just is an incredible author who's doing so much for shorter, young YA books. And I'm so grateful that he's out there in the world with his incredible energy, just pumping out these books that kids just see themselves in, and especially giving a voice to so many kids that have not gotten a mainstream voice in literature before, who haven't gotten to be the hero of their stories. And this book about, how do you choose to use your hands is one that I think that so many kids can relate to, even if they're not sitting in New York City and dealing with the same decisions that our main character has to make. I just think that, like, because Tori pours so much of himself into the page, kids can pick up on that. And I think it just becomes this really powerful, both window, but certainly also a mirror book and a sliding glass door book, again, for kids to walk into an experience that maybe they haven't considered, but then find themselves in that too and go, wait, I have been in this situation, even if it wasn't riding on subway trains or doing other things that I shouldn't be doing, fighting back. So I loved his book. It sat with me for a long time. I read it before it came out, and then it was just like it kept coming back. And then, of course, like you said, the final young adult choice, that's the one I get to have some fun with, as long as the lemon tree grows. I mean, it's hard not to be impacted by the wars that surround us, especially coming home to Denmark, where the war is right next to us. We're not many countries away, both from the continuing civil war in Syria. We're not far away from Ukraine. We're not far away from the war in Palestine. And so I think about how that feels when we continue to go on with our day, and yet this is the reality that these young adults are facing and have been facing their entire lives. I mean, we're coming up on how many years in Syria, right? And so I think about that, and this book about a kid, really a young adult who has a dream, but at the same time feels like in order for her to pursue her dream, she has to leave the dream of her country behind. And
Mhm.
can you live with that? I mean, it just sucked me in, and I just sat with it, and it's a crying book, but it's
Yes.
also but it's also a power book
Yeah.
where you also feel like the power just exude off the pages, and
Yeah.
it really just fills you up with some of the power that maybe you need. And of course, we can look at the situation and go, "Well, I'm not in that situation." No, but like, how many of us have felt like we have to sacrifice in order to achieve, or we always have to give something up because we can't have everything as far as what we want for happiness and for safety and for stability. And then it also came down to that this is set in a country that is still in a civil war that we have conveniently forgotten because other wars overtook it.
Yeah.
And so for me too, it was also a little bit of like, how are we leaving the youth behind, in these countries where civil war is still raging and the rest of the world has just kind of moved on because our attention is needed elsewhere. And so when I sit with these books, it's not just the story. It's also, what questions will it leave us with for the rest of the world? How am I going to go out and now react somehow to
Right.
the impact of this story? And is it just that I now know more? Okay. that's huge. Knowledge is power. Or is it that I'm going to go out and actually form an opinion based on it and maybe do work to make the world a better
Yeah,
place? And so yeah, I mean, every year I'm so lucky that these books exist and that people are on board the ride and say, yeah, let's sink into this world together, and let's also put our kids together even when they are vulnerable. And I think that that's really a beautiful, powerful thing that Read Aloud allows us to do.
absolutely. I think what I've also loved seeing over the years as the Global Read Aloud has grown is the authors themselves, right? Really being an excited, active part
Mhm.
of GRA. That has been such a wonderful thing to see, and I imagine it must feel so good to you.
It's the strangest
Well,
thing. It just, I mean, it was Catherine Applegate who reached out to me, and she said, "Do you mind if I get involved?" And I had never in my wildest dreams thought that, that was even, I hadn't even dreamed that,
right,
because I know authors and how busy they are and how they are so underpaid. And I was never going to be the one that was like, oh, by the way, if you want to be involved.
right,
But she was like, I want to do stuff. And so that was the year that I realized that maybe letting the authors know was a good thing.
yeah,
Also, because what often tended to happen is that once they were selected, all of a sudden they would get swarmed with people who were going to do the global read aloud, especially as it got bigger and bigger. People going, oh, we'd love for you to visit or Skype, or do you do this and this? And so I didn't want to catch anyone blindsided, and also allowed me to explain like a little bit about the project. So they know, like, sometimes it's like an hour before. I try to do like the night before, like, hey, tomorrow, this is going to, congratulations. And I share a little bit about the project. And then I say, you don't have to do anything. Like, you can just sit back and see
right,
this happen. There is no, I don't expect anything from you, because you've already given us the gift of your words and your imagination and your story. And if you want to, I can tell you more. And I can tell you, like, if you do want to get involved or if you have time for it, I can tell you that. But just know that there's no expectations. And it's just been incredible to see how so many authors have then found different times and different ways to interact with people sharing their story. I'll never, I think probably the most impactful one, I mean, and they're all impactful. Anyone who does anything, even if it's just writing back to me saying thanks, that, like, that's amazing to me. I fangirl. I'm like, oh my gosh, this
yes.
is amazing. Like, but when Amy Krauss Rosenthal was selected, I got this incredibly enthusiastic response, true Amy style, of all the things that she wanted to do. And she wanted to do a Roald Dahl day because it was a play on Read Aloud and like the Sparkle Day and all these things. And then she got sick. The cancer came back. And her assistant reached out to me and she was like, I just want you to know that Amy still wants to do all of these things, but she's really sick and she can't be a part of it. And so when Amy was the author, there were all these extraordinary things that Amy came up with that her assistant did for her. And the day that I found out that she passed away, I was standing in my classroom and I just lost it in front of my seventh graders, because I just think about, like, here was a person who was going through this incredible, awful hardship in her life, and yet she still saw this project as just like this playful, incredible experience of her books being celebrated, and she wanted to give back to that. And I'll never forget that year, her and her incredible spirit. But so the authors know there's no pressure, but also they can run with it. Like,
Yes,
here's a captive audience. You want people to come
yes,
to your website, here you go. You want to host a contest for 15 minutes with you? Like, that's going to blow some people's minds.
yeah.
Yeah, Sharon Draper, it was her first Zoom call she had ever done. I remember Simon, and she's so wonderful. And I remember Simon and Schuster reaching out to me, like her assistants, and being like, Pernille, you don't understand. Sharon does not do these. And it was like a live kind of, it was Skype,
Mhm.
live Skype. and others could join in, and they had sent in questions, and she was just like, you guys just tell me what to do. Like, she was so fun, like she is. And I was like, what do you mean, this is our first one ever? They're like, she's never agreed to do this before. I was like,
That's
oh,
exciting. Yeah.
oh. So not only do the authors give us their incredible books, but then when they have the capacity to give us other things, it is truly amazing. And for kids to have their question selected, or or
Yes.
a shout out, it's just amazing what they do.
Yeah. That can be the thing, the meeting the author, the hearing the backstory, that one little connection often is the thing that just, it's like Christmas morning, right? We all get so excited when our authors reply, but that can be the one thing that just
Mhm.
keeps them going and just snowballs into this wonderful reading identity and bookish life. And just you feel like the whole Global Read Aloud does, you just feel part of something bigger. Like when you
Yeah.
get to do these things, it's such an amazing experience. I have participated, I don't know how many years now, but with my teachers. So they are undergraduate students who are kind of participating in the program. And one of my favorite things I did as a coach consultant in my home district, I was part of this organization that worked with about 20 different schools. And I was so excited when they said yes, but I said, I want to do a session. I want to do something where I introduce the Global Read Aloud to everybody. Districts sign up, they
Mhm.
pick their book, we meet, they get their books, we coordinate. I was like the middleman.
Yeah, you were the
Even,
glue.
yes, even if they just connect with each other, I
Mm.
want them to know. And it was one of my favorite professional learning experiences because it was real, it was
Mhm.
authentic. They were getting books. And, for teachers who have so many hours of CTLE
Mhm.
credit to get into New York, they felt like, okay, this matters. And they
Mhm.
were some of my most, I mean, who doesn't have fun passing out books and doing mystery Skypes with classrooms in Canada? It was wonderful.
But also the fact that you took that on, right? I think that that's also the power of the Global Read Aloud, that you saw the power in the project and went, okay, how can I help
Yeah.
others come into this? Because it can feel real overwhelming. Like if because it's a project that's not laid out, like here's step one and here's day
Right.
one and here's what you do. When you're new to this, like if it wasn't for people like you kind of taking someone new with you and going, let's do this together, I think it would be a really murky place to start.
Yeah.
And I just love too, like you said, you can just connect with each other. Like this can also just be you listening to the read aloud, or you doing a read aloud in your classroom and going, wow, we're part of something bigger, and maybe we'll go and see what other people are producing or creating, but we don't have to take on the extra work, because also, like, we educators have enough to do, and it shouldn't ever be a burden. So thank you for coordinating that, because I just think, like, it is exactly this, of someone opening up and saying, there's this cool thing and I'm here to help you with it. And by the way, you're going to get some books too, which is pretty cool.
Yes.
And then low pressure, right? Like just come and be a part of it and then see where it goes. And I think that that's so beautiful. So thank you for doing that, because
Oh,
that's my favorite stories to hear, right? And
yeah.
I love that you've brought teacher educators into it. I love that so much. And now we have a Global Read Aloud teacher educator group, which is so cool and
Yeah.
shows the continued kind of organic growth. I think the next group we're probably going to end up putting as a homeschool parent, because I noticed this year there were so many homeschool parents that signed up in the Facebook group. I was like, I wonder if it would be nice that they just kind of had their own group, because obviously that's going to look different than me sitting in Oregon, Wisconsin, reading aloud in my classroom.
Right.
So we'll see.
That's exciting. And I think I'm really glad you said, just by reading the book with your classroom and knowing that you are part of something bigger means you are a part of the
Hmm.
Global Read Aloud. It can be as small and intentional or as big and bold and connective as you want it to be. And now technically the Global Read Aloud, at least this year, runs from October 7th to November 15th. So we are kind of
Hmm.
nearing the end.
Hmm.
But I want listeners to hear from you before we wrap up that it's not too late, that it
It's
isn't this
not.
bounded 6-week thing. So I want them to hear that. So they're not
Yeah,
like,
no.
Stephanie, why did you wait until now to put this episode out? Tell them.
It's not too late to join this year, because the only, like, kind of unspoken rule, and not so unspoken, is, don't read ahead. But the thing is that right now people are still sharing resources, and sure, there might not be as many people, like if you're a couple weeks later starting, there's not maybe as many people actively sharing like a Kahoot or whatever. But there's still a lot of people still coming into the project and starting now, or even that already know like we're not going to start this read aloud until January,
Yes.
and then posting and saying, hey, does anyone want to connect with me now? And also, like we mentioned earlier, the group never sleeps. And so the Facebook group that you can be a part of, like, it's not just for the Global Read Aloud. You have another idea. You want to do, a project like we're learning about weather in second grade right now. You want to learn about the weather in other people's classrooms. Like, put a post up in the Global Read Aloud community and say, hey, can you send us a picture of what's outside your window? Like, what's the weather like right now? Use the group to cultivate your own connections, because it's a place where people want to share and they want to connect, and make the read aloud work for you. It's okay to not start on that. It's typically always the first Monday in October that we start, unless it falls on some sort of major holiday, which I screwed up and did one year, and I will never do that again because I felt really bad, and it wasn't respectful. But like, it's okay to come in now. And there's still contests going on. Like Min right now is still he's doing a weekly giveaway of a Zoom with him on his Instagram channel.
Really?
Tori is doing weekly videos where he picks questions from kids and then answering them on Instagram. Like, there's still contests going. There's a crazy Ozo robot contest happening right now in there. Like, just people coming in from Ryan, who's this incredible guy that does these Kahoots and does all this stuff. And like, there are so many things happening in the project still. And so it may get quieter, but it's never gonna stop.
Yeah.
So you can still join. And then you can also tell me what should I be reading for next year's read aloud, because that's what I'm doing right now, or what was great, what sucked. Like,
Yeah.
come in and be a part of the conversation and put your mark on it. So yeah, it definitely doesn't end November 15th. It just
Yeah.
changes a little bit.
Yeah. So where can they find you online? What's the best place for them to get all of the details that they want to know about this?
So the Global Read Aloud is at theglobalreadaloud.com. And if you go into the blog, I don't share often in there, but like, that's where the announcements are made. Obviously, Facebook, the Global Read Aloud. There's a main group. There's a page for the project as well. Then there's groups for the books. So there, it's pretty easy. I'm really Googleable. I think I'm the only like Pernille Ripp in the world. And so I hang out a lot on Instagram these days, where I share book recommendations. And sometimes I'll post like little, not spoilers, but little like teasers of like, in this stack there are potential global read
Yeah.
authors. And then I always have to hold myself to it when I change my mind. So that's fun. But I share about just all the wild, wacky world of literacy and student engagement on Instagram. I'm hanging out on Threads right now too, which has been kind of nice. And yeah, Patreon. I have a blog, but I don't use it very often because, 4 kids and
You're busy.
and teaching in a new country in a language that like I have never been a teacher in has been really wild. So yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, Google. There we go. It's all over.
And I'll put links to all the places in
Perfect.
in the show notes to make it easy as well. I just want to give you a big thank you on behalf of, myself, of every teacher I've ever introduced the project to, of every coach I've ever introduced the project to, of every child that I have just read with as part of this project. It's so meaningful. It's so important. And I'm just so grateful that you went on that drive and you went for it.
Yeah, no, I thank you, and thank you for believing in the project and being part of just this organic growth that has happened around the project, because I think about just the experiences that we're allowing kids to have of seeing themselves in books, but certainly also seeing the lives of others that they maybe couldn't fathom or that they've never maybe considered. And I think in this time where we continue to be so incredibly divided and often just see our differences as something that will never bring us together, we forget about each other's humanity. And I think that books that we read aloud can really bring us back. And I think a project like this, I've seen it break down stereotypes. I've seen it break down boundaries. I've seen it grow understanding and empathy and kindness, and also outrage, which I don't think there's anything wrong with outrage. I think we need to channel that. Um, and so I just appreciate that there are people like you in the world that also believed in this wild idea that I flung into the atmosphere 15 or yeah, nearly 15 years ago, and said, I wonder if anyone wants to join. I would have never I'm going to get emotional. I would have never imagined that others would say yes, and that they would keep saying yes, because I'm just some kid from Denmark. And if I'd known that it was going to be what it has been and what it is, I would have never dared to dream the dream, because who was I
Yeah.
to do that? And I think that it also just shows us that, like, sometimes we just have to put those ideas out there and see where they take us.
Yeah. Well, I think right now we need the Global Read Aloud more than ever. And I'm just so grateful that you keep doing it year after year and figuring it all out as it grows and changes and expands. And we just bring as many people along as we can. I think it's a gift and it's hope. It's hope, truly.
We need that. We
Yeah.
need that more than ever.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Stephanie.
Thank you so much.
Thank
And
you.
listeners, thanks for listening to this episode. Go out and get a Global Read Aloud book and join in. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the KidLit Love podcast. You'll find links to all the books, resources, and ideas mentioned in the show notes at alitlife.com. And if you want more, you might like to listen to my other podcast called Get Literate. It's a podcast that explores all things books and reading, notebooks and writing, and everything in between to build a life you love. One more thing. If you love what you listened to today, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, or take a screenshot of the episode and text it to a bookish friend. This helps the podcast grow and builds our bookish community of KidLit Love. Thanks for listening.